Nu metal is the most mid to late 90s thing I can think of. It brings to mind images of Fred Durst crowd surfing on a piece of literal wood at Woodstock 99. Can you believe this dude was Britney Spears level famous in the 90s? I wish someone would put him in a conservatorship. The genre has come back to a certain degree online these days, and it made me want to get down with some nu metal based nostalgia vibes for myself. So I went back to my personal favorite band from the era. I chucked on some Get Some by Snot, and I couldn't believe it, dude. I still loved it. Snot will always be grouped in with the nu metal scene of the 90s. But Get Some is a DIY punk record if I've ever heard one. I'm Dan Frampton, and this is that time a punk band went nu metal. The late 90s were totally fricked, man. The two biggest bands had names that sounded like they were named after 2/3 of a prison meal. Limp Bizkit and Korn. Adults and journalists hated the stuff, but 12-year-olds? Oh boy! 12-year-olds loved it. We all did. Every single one of us. And collectively together, we made these men rich and famous. We now realize that Fred Durst was just our version of Logan Paul.
I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment, and I don't expect to be forgiven.
But there was a smaller band, and they were faster, louder, and more aggressive than anything I was seeing on television at the time. And you probably guessed it. They were Snot, and they were fronted by a charismatic criminal dude that everybody loved named Lynn Strait.
Do I have to get naked people for you to remember my name? It's Lynn from Snot, alright?
And in 1997, they released their album Get Some on Geffen Records. And boy, let me tell you, it was hard to get some. This record was insanely hard to find. The files were nowhere online because, you know, it was 1997 and I don't even know if Napster was a thing yet. And I couldn't even order it from any of the record stores in my town. Wasn't even orderable. This record was out of my hands and all I knew about them was a video called Snot by Snot and everything that all these big nu metal guys were saying about Snot in interviews. I needed these tunes. Why were they so hard to find? But I was safe. I had a guardian angel on my side, and that angel happened to be my sister. She came through in the clutch with that record for me and gifted it to me one day out of nowhere. I forget what the occasion was or how she obtained it, but none of that matters. All that matters is that was the most hyped I've ever been to acquire a set of tracks. When people categorize Snot as a nu metal band, they aren't necessarily wrong. The songs on Get Some definitely have a little bit of nu metal flavoring, thanks mostly to the experimentation with funk and metal. But those songs were certainly born from the DIY ethics that came from the punk scene. In the song Mr. Brett, Lynn puts it like this: punk rock's been good to you. Now corporate punk's the thing to do. Obnoxiously, you raised your fee. You'll see to it we all get screwed. That song is basically about how in the 90s when punk went fucking mainstream, all these punkers turned into pop stars and the whole thing was just crumbling. You can hear his passion for punk in the song as it serves as more of a criticism of his peers rather than just a disdain for the scene that he came up in. Given that that's how he was feeling, I can totally understand why he'd want to experiment a little bit outside the strict confines of punk rock by incorporating elements of metal, funk, and hip-hop. Those just so happen to be the same elements that made up the rap rock world of nu metal. The early 90s were dominated by grunge, the mid-90s were all about skate punk, but the late 90s belonged to nu metal. So by trying not to appeal to the mainstream punk crowd of the mid-90s, Lynn accidentally made his band appeal to the new mainstream audience of nu metal in the late 90s. The appeal may have been there, but the attention and the coverage certainly was not. The only time you ever heard of them is if you went to Ozfest and watched all the opening acts, or you heard a tour story that some guy told about Lynn. Get Some still rips to this day. Lynn's vocals fucking rule. Those riffs, those arrangements are so fun, so blood pumping, so like adrenaline filled that they are just so impossible to ignore. However, 1 year after that record came out, Lynn Strait died in a car crash. Now that fact personally hits me differently now as an adult because I too was struck by a truck on the highway, but somehow I managed to survive, whereas one of my favorite vocalists from my childhood did not. And that's kind of a mindfuck for me, you know? I know it's a bit of a non sequitur, but I can't escape those feelings when I put on this record. So when I say that this is the most memorable album to me, that shit's layered, man. And the story gets even sadder because the band recorded a bunch of instrumentals that were ready for Lynn to track his vocals over, but sadly, those sessions would not happen. However, the tracks wouldn't go unused. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to practically get every big name in the genre to appear on a tribute record to Lynn, where they got to sing over the recently recorded Snot instrumentals. The feature list reads like a who's who of nu metal. It's got everybody, like Jonathan Davis, Fred Durst, Serge Tekkanen, Brandon Boyd, and Mr. Ozzy friggin' Osbourne, him friggin' self, plus way more. This is what the album cover looks like now. Here's what it looked like when I grabbed it as a teenager. Which one do you prefer? I think the first one looks more like a tribute to Lynn, but the second one looks like a tribute to the artists on the disc. Now, all the guests on the record were the biggest names in the scene. I can't stress that enough. And they were all friends with Lynn. They were all very close to him. They all toured with him, yada yada yada. So this was a very emotionally dark recording session for every single one of them. Fred Durst's lyrics are comically Fred Durst-like, but they really do come from an emotionally honest place. The general feeling of the record can be summed up by Jonathan Davis's first line that he sings, where he simply says, "It's so fucked, I'm here doing this." The album definitely sounds more nu metal this time around rather than an offshoot of punk. So if Lynn were around to actually sing over these songs, who knows what this record would have done for the culture. If you happen to be familiar with the story of Bradley Knowles of Sublime, then you might be able to see the parallels drawn between these two guys' careers. It's two stories of singers who finally, after years of working, get to put out their debut record on a major record label. They pushed punk rock's boundaries and ultimately died before they got to see the impact that their music would have on the people. And I really can't bring myself to talk about their dogs, dude. I am not that strong. It's the saddest fucking thing ever, man. I'm sorry it has such a sad ending, but that is what happened that time that a punk band went nu metal. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, you might like my last video. Click over here to watch it. I'll see you there, or in the next one. Dan Frampton, Snot by Snot, go listen to some, whatever.